Okay, guys, this is a video mostly about the Acropolis, but I wanted to go over a few things more about the Athenian Agora, just in case the videos that you watched didn't fully emphasize it, which I believe they did, but just in case. So essentially, the Agora starts off as a marketplace, but then well, that's the word Agora just means marketplace. But then the Athenian Agora really develops into a space that is not just about buying and selling in goods, but it develops into more of like a governmental center, a center of discussion and philosophy and politics, et cetera, et cetera. So it starts off just as regular old commerce, but then blooms into something greater from there. So note that the date here is archaic through Hellenistic Greece. So this space has begun around 600 BCE and goes all the way through about 150 CE. So we're talking about really a huge expanse of time within Greek history. So it's important to know where it's located. It's located at the foot of the Acropolis, which I'm about to go over in just a moment. But Acropolis means high city. So the Acropolis is a number is a basically a place on a cliff, so high above and looks over the city. And there are a number of structures built on the Acropolis, and this location of the Agora is very important in terms of its proximity to the Acropolis because of this big road that runs through it, which I'll talk about in a moment. So, like I said, it morphs over time from an open space marketplace to basically a center of city life. So we have both public and private structures and governmental structures as well, and they are on both sides of this big road. Well, it's not really a road, but it's a road, a path that's very important to Athenian identity, called the Pan-Athenaic Way. That is the name of this path, this road that runs through the marketplace. So by about 400 BCE, it's got also religious structures, and I mentioned, governmental places like the city mint, military headquarters, et cetera. So it really blooms into something larger than just a marketplace. A couple terms that you need to know: a stoa is a roofed colonnade. What's a colonnade? A colonnade is a row of columns, all right? So the stoas, so you have a row of columns on one side, a row of columns on the other side, and basically a roof, attaching them. So the stoas had houses. They were also places where the citizens could gather and discuss things like philosophy and politics, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things we know about the Athenians is their love of discussion. This is why when we think about Greek philosophy, we're mostly thinking about Athens. We also need to know that the term for a city hall, or a meeting place rather, for the city council, which is the Bouleuterion. I'm sure I mispronounced Bouleuterion, yes, which is, I believe this is the Bouleuterion here. No one on AP tests it's not going to be asked of you, but just in case you needed, they ask you what the city council, if there was a city council meeting place. Yes, there was there. Okay, so here's the Bouleuterion. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, it's right here. Okay, so we have this kind of half semicircle here, and then so just know that there's a place for governmental meetings. So this Bouleuterion, the meeting place for the city council, had about 500 mentions, 500 members, excuse me. And there it is again, right? It's located there. So I mentioned the Stoa already, and there's an image of the Stoa, right? Okay, so that one seems to have art on it, which is not something that would have been, I think, well, maybe they had frescoes or mosaics there. But remember, stoas were places of discussion, but also places where people could set up shops. There was also other things there other than shops and governmental buildings. There was a racetrack. There was a courtroom. There were some also private houses and private shops. There was a mint, as I've already mentioned. A tholos is a small round building with a conical roof, and that's located here. And the executive council of the city council would meet there, the tholos. I've mentioned the Pan-Athenaic Way already. This leads to our celebration of the Pan-Hellenic Festival. So Pan-Hellenic means, of course, all Greece, right? And so we have a yearly festival, but the Pan-Athenaic Way is in particular special for the citizens of Athens. There's also a library, or there was a library located here as well. The Pan Athenaea, right? The all Athenian festival, right, is the Athens' most important festival, and that's where we get into the Pan-Athenaic Way. And it was considered a really grand, important festival and the most impressive one in the Greek world, right? Everybody who's a citizen of Athens could take part in this festival, right? So this is a special event because women could get out of the house because normally they were stuck in the house, and they had a role, which is going to be mentioned in a few minutes when it comes to the Acropolis and the Parthenon, an active role in public function. And so this holiday was generally, its belief is it was celebrated on Athena's birthday. Athena, of course, is important to Athens. Look at the names, Athena, Athens. Athens is named for the goddess Athena, and because the Athena is understood to be the city's patron goddess. There was a contest between her and Poseidon, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. Anyway, this Pan-Athenaea, this whole celebration, this festival, consisted of contests, processions, and sacrifices. Okay? Contests, processions, and sacrifices. And a lot of it took place here. Not all of it, but a lot of it. The most important part being the procession along the Pan-Athenaic Way up to the Acropolis, to the which I'll talk about in a moment. So we have some images here, and this relates to the Pan-Athenaic Festival and the procession that goes through the Agora. So it makes its way down the Pan-Athenaic Way through the Agora and toward the Acropolis, right? We have sacrifices made along the way. The term propylaea, this is the propylaea right here. It basically means the gateway or the big entrance into the Acropolis complex, okay? Only Athenian citizens could go through the propylaea. So the procession passes the Parthenon, which is the big temple right here, which we'll talk about in a few moments. And it goes to the Erechtheum and an altar in front of the Erechtheum. And the Erechtheum is right here. The Erechtheum is notable for the caryatids. You'll see some image. These are caryatids. So basically what's a caryatid? It's an image of a woman who serves as a column. So that's what we have here. Really fantastic stuff. This is all from I'll talk about that in a second. Classical age. All right. So at the Erechtheum, there was a big olive wood statue of Athena. And this big olive wood statue would be given every year a new Peplos. And I mentioned Peplos. We saw Peplos. I mentioned that in the video, mentioned it. We looked over the Peplos core. And so this Peplos was taken in and placed on the statue by these craftswomen called the Ergosteins, that we call them the Ergosteins, essentially, to the Erechtheum and placed on this life-size statue of Athena, which is no longer in existence. This is just kind of what we think it might have looked like. So, and that happened every year. Every 4 years, they went to a gigantic Peplos, huge, was brought to the statue of Athena at the Parthenon, which is the big temple on the Acropolis, and it was presented to the huge statue of Athena there. Neither of these statues still exist. We do have, recreations, this being the recreation of the olive wood statue that's about life size, the large, huge statue of Athena in the Parthenon is not life size. It's much larger than life size. I'll show you an image of a recreation in just a few moments. So this big image of this big statue of Athena in the Parthenon was so large that the Peplos was actually carried on a mast of a ship on wheels. This was huge, right? So this statue was about 39 feet tall, not life size, right? So the fact that it was brought in on the mast of a ship may in fact be a nod to the Athenians' military power in war on the sea, right? The Athenians were known for their great military power. We're talking about a group of islands from Greece, right? So ship naval power is going to be very important. All right, so a lot of what I've just mentioned in terms of the Parthenon, okay, in terms of bringing the Peplos to the statue of the goddess Athena at the Parthenon, takes place during the classical period, all right? So we're looking at three particular periods in Greek history. We're looking at archaic, classical, and Hellenistic. Now I'm going to speak specifically about the classical period. This image of the Acropolis and all the buildings on the Acropolis, this is from the classical period, okay? Remember, the Acropolis is just the space, is like the big, high, elevated cliff space, big rock, the high city. That's what Acropolis means. And the Acropolis has been around, since Athens' birth, right? And there have been a variety of different buildings on the Acropolis. Okay, the Parthenon is one of those buildings, as is the Temple of Ergosteins. Okay, actually, yeah, as is a temple where they brought the smaller Peplos. We're going to talk about another temple here in just a moment. Okay, so those buildings are from the classical period, because the Acropolis was, of course, sacked by the Persians in 480 BCE, and they kind of tore it apart, right? But and I'll talk about that in a moment. But the classical period is what we're focused on now. We've done archaic. Now moving on to classical. Two major events. It begins with, about 480 BC with the defeat of the Persians. Actually, the Persians didn't sack the Acropolis in 480, but so they defeat the Persians in about 480 BCE. So you should be thinking about, Greek defeat of the Persians. That sounds like something we have studied before. Where was that mentioned? That, of course, is mentioned at the audience hall of Darius and Xerxes, the Apadana, right? And the ending event of the classical period, generally, we frame it with the death of Alexander the Great. All right. So there's this period of time. It's not that long, right? It's about 50 or so years, but we consider it the classical period, So we have art, this is our history, we're focused on art that is created based on three different isms. Humanism. What is humanism? I've mentioned humanism before because humanism comes back during the Renaissance, right? Humanism is basically the belief that man is capable of really great things. And in humanism, the individual human is exalted. Intellectual pursuits are encouraged, but intellectual pursuits based on rationalism, okay, on the idea that the world has order and that we can understand the world's order. The third thing is idealism. We're still into the ideal, right? Which we've seen, we've heard talking with respect to the Greeks and the before with the Kuroi. So we're still into portraying human beings in an ideal fashion, but as you've already seen, the Greeks have more of a dedication to also portraying the human body in a more realistic fashion. So it's both realistic, or you could say maybe naturalistic, and ideal at the same time. A good quote to remember about the classical period is, "Man is the measure of all things." So we are to understand the world based on how human beings operate in it, essentially, in the best way. Okay. And then also know thyself, which is at the oh goodness, where are we? The I've just lost all my vocabulary. It has to do with where Oedipus Rex goes, and it will come back to me. If you're in my English class, you should already know that. All right. Know thyself. That man, human beings, one of their greatest tasks as a human being is to know who you are really, right? To really know the Oracle of Delphi. The Oracle of Delphi. That's what it is. Sorry. Okay. All right. So when did the Acropolis really get redone? Remember, it had been sacked by the Persians. Okay. And when did that happen? It happened under Pericles. Pericles is our guy. Pericles is the guy who leads the charge of redoing the Acropolis and creating this incredible building campaign. Okay. So we're talking about the golden age of Greece, right? And so when we think about the golden age of Greece, you want to think about Pericles, who was a general. He was an orator. He was a patron of the arts. He was a politician. And we understand him. One of the things that we can say is that he's, quote unquote, the first citizen. Now, was he the first citizen of democratic Athens? Does that mean he's actually the first citizen? No, but it means that he exemplifies all the ideals of democratic citizenship. Okay. I highly recommend reading the history of the Peloponnesian War. It's really, really interesting. Anyway, maybe you will. I don't know. So Pericles is really the one who, under whose auspices, essentially, Athens reaches its understood to be height. Okay. So again, he's the one who instigates the rebuilding of the Acropolis, which had been sacked by the Persians. I was right, 480. Just very bad with dates. Okay. And the Parthenon, which is the major, big, gigantic temple on the Acropolis. Okay. All right. So here we are, Acropolis. Lots of stuff on the Acropolis. All right. The Propylaea is right there. There's the Parthenon. There's the Erechtheion that's got the caryatids, where the Ergosteins would bring the Propylaea for the life-size Peplos for the life-size statue of Athena. We're also going to talk about the Temple of Athena, Nike, down here, which we'll get to in a little bit, actually, in class. So why is Athena such a big deal in Greece? It's because Athena and Poseidon kind of had they had a contest to stake their claim as the patron of Athens. And so what did Poseidon do? He struck the Acropolis with his trident, and water came out. Yeah. So that makes sense. Yay, water. Yay, we need water. This is a place of water. It's islands. Cool, Poseidon. But what does Athena do? Athena gives them the olive tree. And what do we get with olives? We get oil, olive oil. All right. And if you know anything about the Greeks or Greek cuisine, you know how, or, just Greek culture, olive oil is extremely important. So Athena wins the contest. So that's why it is called Athens. And that's why you will see much of the iconographic program at the Parthenon dedicated to Athena. So the location of the Parthenon was a way to link the building to the past, right? It's on the Acropolis. The Acropolis, way, 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 way before all of this, had been once a citadel. There are lots of myths associated with the Acropolis. So it makes sense to put the Parthenon, which is a temple dedicated to Athena, on the Acropolis. So there's the Parthenon at night. you know, we had some problems. It got blown up at a certain point. They were using it to store explosives. All right. So Persians came in, sacked the Acropolis, right, in 480. And the Greeks, of course, get their revenge later on by taking down Persepolis, right? And of course, after the defeat of the Persians, the Greeks or the Athenians emerge as the dominant city state among the Greek cultures, among Greek islands. I already mentioned Pericles. He sets on this building campaign to really rebuild the Acropolis, make it more glorious than it was before. And so that's what we have. Well, that's what they had, but it's kind of fallen apart for various reasons. Again, another image. There's the Propylaea. There's the Parthenon. There is the Erechtheion. The Erechtheion, which is where the statue of Athena was, but there before the Persians came in, there was a different temple for Athena, for the statue, the life-size statue of her, and that was there, but it's gone. It was gone. And then the Temple of Athena, Nike, which I'll discuss as well later on. All right, there is a video listed on the materials section of Google Classroom that talks about the classical orders. It goes through the three classical orders of the Doric, the Ionic, and the Corinthian temples and capitals. It also talks about basic temple construction. I more than highly recommend. I mean, I'm not going to require it, but if you're smart and you care about doing well in this class, you'll watch that video. Okay. If I were you, I'd pause it and do it right then. Now, right? So go pause, watch that video. It's on the materials section, and then come back to this video. Okay. Or not. It's up to you. So I'm assuming that you paused and you came back. So just another image of the Parthenon, which again is the big, gigantic temple on the Acropolis. All right. Remember, it's Parthenon, not Pantheon. The Pantheon is Roman. We will get to the Pantheon later. It is Parthenon. Don't mix them up. It's hard to do. It's easy to mix them up sometimes, but all right. So there is a recreation of the gigantic statue of Athena that would have been in the Parthenon. So you can find this in Memphis at Vanderbilt or Nashville at Vanderbilt, because they've got a replication of the Parthenon at Vanderbilt because the people who at Vanderbilt, they love the Greeks, or at least they once did. So this isn't quite right, actually, but that's all right. But we can see that this recreation, it's huge. It's kind of gaudy, but, you know, not surprising. So the statue of Athena Parthenos, again, the one that was in the Parthenon, was designed by a guy named Phidias. He's going to come back later with another work. Okay. It was made of gold and ivory. That's a lot of ivory, right? Think about what it takes to get that much ivory to Greece, right? It was over a wooden frame. The Parthenon was a place of worship dedicated to Athena. It's also a statement of civic strength, which I'll talk about when it comes to the frieze on the inside of the Parthenon. You don't know what a frieze is unless you have listened to that video. I think it talks about it. And it was also at the same time, in addition to being a place of worship and a statement of civic strength, it was also a treasury. So the treasury of Athens was kept here under the protection of Athena. Who better to watch over the money than the patron goddess of the city? All right. So what the Acropolis might have looked like at its height. This is obviously during the Athenian Festival. Here we go. Right. Only if you're a Greek can you pass through the Propylaea, or if you're an Athenian, can you pass through the Propylaea. There's the Parthenon. There's the Erechtheion. There is the Palace of Athena, Nike. All right. So very quickly, the Parthenon on the outside is a Doric temple. If you watch the video, you know what that means. hopefully you did, is a Doric temple. Doric is the first of the three classical orders. It is the most simple. We have the capital here, which is pretty basic. And above the capital, you have the architrave. You don't have to worry too much about that. The thing that you need to look at are the metopes. The metopes. So the metopes are the sculpted images that appear in the entablature, which is the whole section. It's these sculptured images that appear here. So you have a sculpted image, a metope, and then you have a triglyph, and then you have another metope, and then you have another triglyph. You have another metope, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the outside of the temple. When you walk into the Parthenon, there is another kind of frame of a different kind of temple, which is an Ionic temple. So we can see the Ionic capital here, right? And then we have the architrave here. And instead of triglyph, metope, we have a frieze. And now here it's like, well, the frieze looks very blank. But at the Parthenon, the frieze on the inside, on the Ionic, the Ionic frame of the interior of the Parthenon, the frieze depicted the Pan-Athenaic procession, and the one of the plaques that it depicts is the women, the Ergosteins, bringing the Peplos to the statue of Athena. Okay. So I want you to think a little bit about what is being suggested about what the Athenians are suggesting about themselves through including themselves in images on their most holy temple. They don't just include images of the gods or of Athena on this holy temple, on their most holy temple, on their statement of civic strength and pride and source of pride and all that good stuff. They include images of themselves. That is a statement. Okay. Right. So the entablature is from the top of the pediment to the very top of the capital, right? The architrave is on the capital. Architrave here, architrave there. And then again, Doric, metope, triglyph, and the Ionic, you get the frieze. The cornice, I don't think you have to worry too much about the cornice, but the cornice is right. The cornices will come back later. The cornice is this kind of ornamental molding before you get to the pediment. And the pediment, you'll see in the, we're going to look at the pediments in a moment. All right, so there's a sculptural program of the iconography in the Parthenon, okay? All right, so let's start with the outside first. On the pediment, on the east side, right? The pediment is that triangle shape thing, right? Is depicted a sculptural program that depicts the birth of Athena, right? That's the east side pediment. Whoops. The west side pediment is also another sculptural program that depicts the contest between Athena and Poseidon. All right. On the east side, under the pediment, we have the triglyphs, metope, all that stuff. All the metopes depict the conflict between the Olympian gods and the giants. And of course, who wins? It's the Olympian gods, right? The Olympian gods who are the most anthropomorphic, right? The most human-like of the Greek gods, which is why they're hailed in particular by the Athenians. All right. So in the metopes, the fights between the fight between the giants and the Olympian gods. And on the metopes over here, you'll have the conflict between the Athenians, I believe the Athenians and the Amazons. The Athenians and the Amazons. Okay. Amazons, group of warrior women. Guess who wins, right? Athenians. On the outside, On the south side, the metopes depict a conflict between the Greeks and the centaurs. The Greeks and the centaurs. There's going to be a video about that. On the north side, the metopes depict the sack of Troy. You've heard the Trojan War? This is the Greek sack of Troy. Okay. So that's the Doric part on the outside. In the internal part, where we have a more Ionic form of Ionic structure, we have a long frieze. Look how long it is. It goes around the whole perimeter. And what does it depict? The Pan-Athenaic procession. Okay, Pan-Athenaic procession, right? And of course, then the statue was in here. You need to pause this video and you need to watch the Khan Academy video on the Parthenon metopes. That's not optional. You need to do it. It's linked in this assignment. Sorry, I'll change that to a period. Okay, pause the video now. Watch the Khan Academy video on the Parthenon metopes. I'm assuming you're back. Okay, so the sculptural program on the east side of the pediment depicts the birth of Athena. Here are some images from that. These are the surviving sculptures from that pediment. That is, what does it depict here? It depicts Helios, the sun, and the horses that come, that help bring the sun up. We see Dionysus. It could be Hercules. We're not sure, right? Etc. And we see a number of other gods. I'll show you an image of what that might have actually looked like when it was fully operational. We'll notice that the figures obviously get taller as we go up, right? Because this is following the rise in angle of the pediment till it gets to a tippy top. And then the figures will get smaller as it goes down. What do you think smack dab in the middle of this? The actual birth of Athena. Well, we say birth. She kind of just sprang from her father's head. She has no mother. She has only a father, which is Zeus, no mother. She is his brainchild. She is the goddess of wisdom. All right, so here's an image, right? We have Helios in the sun. We got Dionysus, maybe Heracles. We got some more gods and goddesses. Right in the middle is Zeus and Athena. And then it goes back down and it ends with night. We start in the morning. We end with night. Okay. You don't need to memorize all this stuff. All you need to know is that it gets progressively larger and that in the middle are Zeus and Athena. And, begins with sunrise, ends with night. So here we have that. So this is what it might have looked like in, I guess, more drawn out form for you. There's Athena springing fully formed from her father's brain. She was never a child. So that's the east side. On the west side, of course, is the conflict between Athena and Poseidon. Athena, of course, is going to win, as you know. All right, there's also another video linked on this assignment. Or actually, I put it in the materials section since it's optional, but I highly recommend you watch it. It goes over, it talks about a number of the metopes that they have at the British Museum. Guess where pretty much all of Greece is? Not in Athens, but in the British Museum. And so this is kind of a promotional video saying, isn't it great that all these sculptures and all these artifacts are here, that we have them in Greece? Isn't it great? Because they're constantly under pressure to give back what they took. So, and they're called the Elgin marbles because of the British guy who brought them to England from Greece. Anyway. All right. Plaque of the Ergosteins. This is part of the frieze. On the interior of the Parthenon, right? On the Ionic part, we have this long frieze, and it depicts the Panathenaic procession. And we remember that part of the Panathenaic procession is bringing this Peplos to clothe the statue of Athena. And so that's what we have here. We have these women who are the Ergosteins, the weavers, right? And this was a very prized position to be in, who are bringing the garments, right? And so they're standing in very classical. You'll notice they're all in contrapposto. The men and the women are in contrapposto. You could even tell the women are in contrapposto because we can see knees sticking out, right? So this is a very classical posture. So you want to think about how the bodies are depicted, the fall of this kind of classical looking drapery. Contrast these women with what you saw of the Peplos core and their depiction of these bodies. Far more realistic, far more dedication to naturalism, even though it's still idealized, right? So again, the Athenians are putting themselves on their religious building, right? All right. There's a video about the plaque of the Ergosteins that is in this assignment. You need to watch it. I know that was a lot of talking. I hope you got through it all. Thanks. We'll continue this in class.